Hello, hello, welcome back to Loki's Librarian. If you are new here, welcome. I am your librarian, Katrina, and on Sundays I do a thing called Books and Booze, where I review a book and mix up a cocktail. This month I've been looking at true crime, from the wrongfully accused to a justifiable homicide, and this week we're going to look at those the media made famous, making this week's book Go Down Together, The True Untold Story of Bonnie and Clyde by Jeff Guinn. The accompanying cocktail, again, comes from Kierra Sondereker's book, Mixology and Murder. It's an Outlaw Spirits, which is 2 ounces of whiskey, 3/4 ounce of fresh lemon juice, 3/4 ounce of fresh orange juice, a teaspoon of Grenadine, Maraschino cherry, and orange peel for garnish. And I am, again, doing the fresh fruit, so this will, again, be a messy one. Let's do this. Now, Bonnie and Clyde have been highly romanticized, and just when their initial fame sets to end, a movie or show will come out that flames the interest in their story again. So they've been in the media's eye since the 1930s, almost consistently. I mean, there's been lulls, but by and large, their names are well enough known that even today, there is a festival in Louisiana on May 23rd. Every year there's an annual Bonnie and Clyde festival, because May 23rd is the day that they died. So they have a Bonnie and Clyde festival in Louisiana to commemorate that every year. Who knew? Certainly not me. Yeah. Oh, well, I think I'm just going to have a little splash of whiskey left over on this one. This book shoots to be as historically accurate as possible. It pulls from some pretty solid primary sources, namely diaries and unpublished memoirs of family members. Why not the newspapers? Well, then as now, the press tended to glamorize what would sell papers. It was not necessarily solid journalism, it was what's going to sell, because it was the Depression, right? Then they really hit their stride in 32 to 34. That's the very height of the Great Depression. Everything was still just in tatters. One of the first things to go was print, newspapers, because if you have to choose between reading the paper or eating, you're going to buy food. So the papers had to come up with something to sell, and so they would glamorize it, right? They wouldn't just report the news, they had to sell a story. And Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker were seen as kind of a modern-day Robin Hood and Maid Marian at first. We'll come back to that. That's how they were sold. There we go. Let's introduce our two main characters, right? You had Clyde Chestnut Barrow, was born March 24th, 1909 or 1910. We're not quite sure of his date, in Tellico, Texas. Now, record keeping was not awesome back then, especially because home birth was still very much the norm. And while Clyde's mother, Kumi, was certainly literate and able to read, his father wasn't. His father never learned to read or write. He spent like 8A in school, and then was like, yeah, this is stupid, I'm not coming back. So the author puts the date as 1910, and the reason he went with that is because that's the date that Kumi Barrow put in the family Bible. And she was a good Christian woman, and so she was very dedicated in recording these things, all right? She regularly attended church. She assisted all of her children attend churches. That's the year she put in the family Bible, so that's the year that the author went with. But you will sometimes see it online as being 1909. There's no proof one way or the other than what was reported in the family Bible, which, hey, that's as good a metric as any to go by. Fresh, squeezed, messy-ass orange juice. 3/4 ounce each, right? Her lifelong habit of attending church and insisting all of her children attend as well stuck with Clyde. And that's not to say he went to the church all the time. In fact, he pretty much did not, especially when he was on the run. But he did pray all the time. He very much tended to stop and pray. He would, before committing a crime, he would say his nightly prayers. He would pray before pulling a job. Or if he just suspected something was amiss and the laws were around. That's how they referred to him, the laws. So he was a praying man, and Bonnie was too. Well, it's a little heavy on the Grenadine, but that's okay. Now, Clyde was the 5th of 7 children born to the Barrows. The family was close-knit all of their lives. I mean, even when Clyde was on the run for the last 5 years of it, he and Bonnie would make frequent trips back to West Dallas to visit their families. Let me shake this up. Now, the Barrow family were sharecroppers. They were dirt poor all of their lives. I mean, even with the money to be made during feeding Europe under Herbert Hoover's humanitarian plans during and in the immediate aftermath of World War I, they were dirt poor. By the time the Depression of the 1920s hit, so this would be the first one that went away very quickly because then President Harding and Calvin Coolidge got the fuck out of the way and let the economy rebound on its own without help. It's amazing how well that worked. They were poor. They never got out of the pores. The poor's the laws. We're going to just pluralize everything. Look, I'm doing the garnish. That is the advantage of doing the fresh fruit, is I actually remembered to do the garnish, right? Although it's orange peel for garnish, so we're going to messily make this a thing. Now, by the time that depression of the 1920s hit, it was obvious that sharecropping was out. This was not a good way of life. It was not going to be a regular thing. And so the Barrows headed towards West Dallas. They loaded up the family wagon with the horse and moved to West Dallas. This is how poor they were. They could not even afford a car. And cars were relatively affordable back then. But you still had to have money to buy them, and Henry Barrow had none. They moved to the slums of West Dallas. Now, there, Henry Barrow became a junk man. He used the family wagon and horse to scrounge up scrap metal and turn it in for mere coins. Now, he was a hard-working man because he slowly saved those supplies to build a family shack, which moved them out of a tent, which made them just a hair above dirt poor in West Dallas. And eventually that shack would be moved to Eagle Ford Road in West Dallas and become a gas station that was run by the Barrow family. Let's try this. I don't know what to make of that. It's not bad. Definitely tart. The lemon overwhelms the orange. Can't taste the whiskey, so it's relatively smooth, but that's okay. A little on the sweet side, but that's going to be the Grenadine. It's okay. Now, when he was a teenager, Clyde began stealing cars, and that was quite easy to do and quite lucrative, and played to his strengths as a driver. And 100 years later, Clyde would have made one hell of a living as a stunt driver in Hollywood. He was that good. But in the 1920s, West Dallas, he quickly became one of the county sheriff's favorite suspects, and they would routinely pick Clyde up on suspicion. Suspicion of what? Who fucking knows? But whatever crime needed solving that day, they suspected him of it, and he was frequently brought in for questioning. Now, this made it very hard for Clyde to maintain steady employment, especially in 1929 after the Great Depression started, and workers in desperate need of work were a dime a dozen. So the employers were like, we're not going to hold a job for you. The police are just going to keep picking you up. You're out of here. They just wouldn't hold a job for him. They had no reason to. Now, let's go look at the other half of this. Bonnie Parker was born October 1st, 1910, so just about 6 months younger than him, in Rowena, Texas. She was the middle child with an older brother and a younger sister. Bonnie's family was also close-knit, and eventually the Barrows and Parkers, through their joint commiseration, would become quite close. Bonnie was very petite. She topped out at 4 foot 11 inches tall. She never weighed more than 90 pounds in her entire life, which suited Clyde quite well. His height has been recorded anywhere from 5'4" to 5'6". He was not a tall man himself. Bonnie was beautiful. By any metric, she was charming, she was vivacious. Everyone who met her fell under her spell. Even when she was seriously injured as a result of a car accident caused by Clyde's reckless driving, the farmers that Clyde coerced into assisting them were drawn to her and smitten in her unconscious state. I mean, just like a sleeping beauty, right? If she had actually followed her dreams to Los Angeles or New York, we might all still know her name as a famous actress rather than as part of an outlaw duo, because she had that kind of charisma to draw people to her. It's not bad. The Parkers moved to Cement City, another suburb of Dallas, in 1914 when the Parker patriarch died. So they moved back in with Emma Parker. I think Emma was her mother. They moved back in with her parents, basically. Bonnie was enrolled in public school and was so beautiful and endearing that no matter what she did, she never got in trouble for it. When she was 15, she met and married Roy Thornton, despite her mother's protests, on September 25th, 1926. The marriage did not last, as Thornton was also a petty criminal, and he vanished not too long after they married and was out of the picture permanently by January of 1929. Now, during the time from when they married to when he vanished, Bonnie needed to make money since her husband was in the wind, and she became a waitress, possibly a side gig as a prostitute. Possibly, that is pure speculation. The author says it's speculation. Even if she did not engage in selling of herself, Bonnie certainly knew enough of the local prostitutes, that which is evidenced by a poem she wrote while she was in prison, the Prostitutes Convention, which highlights the various streetwalkers to be found in Dallas. Back then. Hopefully they're no longer there. I'm sure there are streetwalkers in Dallas, but they're no longer the same ones. They would be quite old if that were the case. Now, from January 29 to January 1930, Bonnie worked as a waitress since she had to contribute something to the household finances. And then in January 1930, while visiting her brother Buster and his new bride at a house party, the bride's brother, Clarence Clay, brought along a friend, one Clyde Barrow. And for all intents and purposes, it was love at first sight on both parties. They dated for a month, and then in February 1930, Clyde was arrested by Dallas police for car theft. Now, he went quietly because he thought this was just for suspicion. He didn't know they had anything concrete on him. But he was arrested at Bonnie's house, and Bonnie became completely hysterical, overdramatic, bawling her eyes out. Why is he under arrest? Why are you taking my man? And she had dramatic flair, and the author speculates that if she hadn't been wailing so much, Clyde might have heard the officer say they were just making the initial arrest for another requesting agency, and he might not have gone quiet. I don't know if she was genuinely that distraught, or if she thought that they might let him go because, pretty girl was crying. Don't know, don't care, that's not what happened. What happened is he was placed under arrest and taken initially to Dallas County Jail, and Bonnie immediately began visiting there. She also, at this point, reached out to the Barrows and introduced herself, and while Kumi was not initially impressed, Bonnie would eventually grow on the family enough that the Barrows would attend her funeral. Mrs. Parker did not attend Clyde's funeral. She always blamed him for taking Bonnie astray. Clyde was eventually taken to Denton, Texas, where he was convicted for car theft and possession of stolen goods, was sentenced to 7 concurrent 2-year sentences at Easton Prison. Now, that's an absolute gift, all right? The 7 concurrent years, meaning he's or two 2-year concurrent 7 concurrent 2-year sentences. There, I'll get the phrase out eventually, right? Is an absolute gift, because that means that in 2 years he's free, home free. He only has to do 2 years because his sentence is concurrent, right? With how incredibly overcrowded the prison was back then, I mean, I'm sure it still is, but back then it definitely was. The sentences being concurrent, there's a very good chance that he would have served as little as 6 months and then been paroled. But Clyde being Clyde and not wanting anyone else to be in charge of him, he engineered an escape with Bonnie's assistance when she smuggled a gun into him at jail in Waco, where he was awaiting transport to Easton Prison. And after a brief time on the run, Clyde was captured, and the judge was so incensed that he basically spit on this gift the judge gave him that he changed the sentence from concurrent to consecutive, meaning instead of 2 years, Clyde now faced 14. And since this was a long-term prison sentence, his work assignment was to the farm at the prison, picking cotton and beans and whatever else they needed to grow. And that was as hard as time can get. While in prison, Clyde was raped many times by one of the prison trustees. Trustees were inmates given free rein over the other inmates to assist the wardens and jailers in maintaining order. Clyde, being the petite little bitty fellow he was a favorite target of one of these trustees. But, give the devil a due, the man was a scrapper, and he eventually beat his assailant to death with a lead pipe. Part of his reasoning for doing that, not just the rape, but another inmate who was serving life sentence and also hated this trustee said, hey, if you kill him, I'll take the fall for it. I'll say I did it, because I'm never getting out anyway. While prison was no more pleasant, at least Clyde was now no longer being raped nightly. Eventually, Clyde being Clyde, couldn't take the hard labor on the farm anymore, and on January 27th, 1932, he had an accident wherein he accidentally cut off 2 of his toes. Only a severe injury like amputation would get him pulled from the farm and moved into the prison itself. So he had a slip and fall accident with a hatchet and lopped off 2 of his toes. And he was learning to walk again when he was advised that his mother had secured a pardon for him from Governor of Texas Ross S. Sterling. That was on February 2nd, 1932. So if he had just held out, 6 more days? 31 days, 5-6 more days, he would have walked out not with a limp the rest of his life. Now, while he had been away is when the Barrows moved the family shack to Eagle Ford Road, and Clyde was determined to go straight and never go to prison again. Between the multiple rapes, the general abuse by the guards, and the self-inflicted amputation, prison had served its intended deterrent effect. Sort of. Clyde would not go back to prison. This, incidentally, is why there's a problem with 3 strikes laws, because if they know they're never going to get out again, why would they ever go quietly? Well, Clyde, now knowing how bad prison was determined he would never go back, regardless of what happened. The Dallas police would not give up their harassment of him. He planned to go straight, because he didn't want to go back to prison, right? But the police just kept arresting him, and he couldn't hold a job in Depression-era America, because why would they keep somebody on the payroll when there were workers that were available for a dime a dozen. He needed a job to purchase the supplies needed to offer vehicle service at the family's gas station. He had always been handy, definitely good with cars, since he could, hotwire a car faster than most people can cough. He couldn't buy the supplies because he couldn't keep a regular job to buy the supplies, and it just became this spiral. So Clyde returned to small-time robbery and motor vehicle theft. And at this time, Bonnie went with him. And it was during this initial crime spree that Bonnie would be arrested. She was ultimately let go after claiming she had been held captive and forced to participate. This was before they became Clyde and Bonnie. They were known as Clyde and Bonnie back then. They didn't alphabetize the names until later, when Bonnie became this femme fatale sex symbol. But whatever. So she was held in prison. She did go to trial, and they were like, yeah, okay, we believe you. We believe that you were held captive and forced into this. Now go and be a good girl. And she didn't. Instead, she rejoined the Barrows. Now, the Barrow gang was always led by Clyde. They were referred to as Clyde and Bonnie up until a '67 movie put out by Warren Beatty. There we go, starring Beatty and Faye Dunaway. At various points, the gang would have other members. You had William Daniel W.D. Jones, Raymond Hamilton, Ralph Foltz, Henry Methvin, and of course Buck Barrow, the older brother of Clyde and Buck's wife Blanche Barrow. At one point, Raymond Hamilton's girlfriend Mary O'Dare joined them, and it was after Mary joined them that Raymond left. Anyways. Now, W.D. Jones was a family friend of the Barrows. He was of an age with Clyde's younger brother L.C., and Jones wanted to join the Barrows on the run. He thought it was romantic and glorious and fuck the laws, right? Until it was no longer fun and became downright terrifying following the shootout that led to the death of Buck and the capture of Blanche, at which point W.D. left the gang and moved to Houston. He was eventually caught there and served prison time. Buck and Blanche were tragic, absolutely tragic. Blanche was the daughter of a minister, and Buck, who had served prison time, was also pardoned. And also set to go straight. And they probably would have believed and let go completely, like it stopped harassing him, because after an escape, he turned himself in and said, I want to serve out the rest of my sentence and go straight and be legitimate. And because he turned himself in after being on the run, they were like, okay, this guy's legit. We will leave him alone. Instead, he went with Bonnie and Clyde to Missouri to talk to them into turning themselves in and going straight, ostensibly. But in following Clyde and Bonnie to Missouri, this set Buck and Blanche on a trajectory to tragedy, as they would ultimately have a shootout with the Laws in Platte City, Missouri. There, Buck would take a shot to the head that doesn't kill him outright, but did seriously injure him. I mean, he died a week, 10 days later. Blanche would get glass shards in her eyes, causing permanent loss of vision in at least one eye and severe compromise of vision in the other eye. A bullet shattered a window where she was kind of hovered over her husband, trying to protect him such as she could, because he had already taken the bullet to the head. And the glass shot out, got in her eyes, and she was essentially blinded from that point on. Now, eventually, the Laws would catch up with them, and when faced with a choice of going down with his brother or running away, Clyde took Bonnie and W.D. and left Buck and Blanche to their fates. Blanche was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Buck died of his injuries a few days after they were caught. Cumie Barrow was able to see Buck before he died, and this is really grim. When she talked to Clyde after this, she said, I'm not going to buy a headstone for Buck. I'm going to wait until you join him, and then I'll buy one and bury you both together. And Clyde agreed with this logic. So the entire family, including the Parkers, was well aware of the trajectory of the couple. Like, everybody knew there was no way this was going to end in anything other than blood and death and, awful tragedy. They all knew this. I mentioned earlier in my review that Bonnie would be seriously injured in a car accident. Well, that is no joke. Buck Barrow ultimately died July 29, 1933. Bonnie's accident had occurred June 10th, 1933, so about 6 weeks prior, when Clyde, who was driving fast like always, missed a road out sign and rolled the car they were in. The battery burst open and spilled all over Bonnie, causing severe chemical burns, burned to the bone, acid chemical burns. The entire last year of her life, Bonnie couldn't walk anywhere. The last known picture of Bonnie and Clyde shows Clyde supporting Bonnie. I'll see if I can find it and pop it up here for you, with her standing on one leg. She literally couldn't put weight on the other leg because it was burned to the bone and the muscles were all degenerate. And I don't know what word I'm looking for. And the only lucky break here is that the folk remedy for burns at that time was to put baking soda on it, which wouldn't work necessarily for a burn caused in a fire, but for a chemical burn, that's the best thing you could possibly do for it. And the farmer that Clyde took her to did exactly that. So baking soda neutralized the acid. Probably the only reason she didn't die outright or require an immediate amputation was that damn baking soda. Like, cut the acid in its tracks. It's ostensibly to assist with caring for Bonnie that Blanche came along when Buck wanted to talk Clyde into going straight. And no good deed goes unpunished. This really is like a neutral cocktail. It has such a tiny little bit of acid, like citrusy after flavor, but it's really quite neutral. I don't know. After Buck and Blanche went down, the shine of criminal life was off for WD, and he also left the party. And it was around this time that Clyde was contacted, I believe it was by Ralph Foltz, asking for assistance in breaking out of Eastham. Now, if you watch the Netflix show The Highwaymen, which was told about the tracking and killing of Bonnie and Clyde, this breakout is where that movie starts. And they did break out their intended targets, that being Foltz and Hamilton. Foltz was Clyde's friend from Eastham from before, and while they were on the same work detail, they often talked about doing a prison break. And he felt that he owed Foltz because Foltz had kind of shown him around and given him a lay of the land in Eastham. Hamilton he owed because Hamilton was currently accused of and charged with a murder that Clyde had actually been a part of. He was misidentified as being there on the night of, and he was actually in Minnesota at the time. So Clyde felt he owed Hamilton, and that's fair. Now, seeing the breakout happen, they went for like 4 inmates, and they came out with like 7 of them. And they crammed them all into the car because they weren't going to leave anybody behind, and Henry Methvin was one of those. And he joined the Barrow Gang at this point and remained a member until the end, actually causing the end in more ways than one. And we'll circle back to that in just a minute. No, actually, we're going to circle back to that right now. From The Highwaymen, they show a scene where Clyde and Bonnie gunned down 2 motorcycle cops. Now, this was the incident where the people really started to turn against them. Like, prior to this, I mean, they had been robbing mostly small gas stations, very much like the ones owned by Henry Barrow. But they occasionally robbed banks, and so for that they were seen as kind of folk heroes, right? Fuck the banks. Until they attacked the law enforcement. People really didn't have anything wrong with law enforcement back then. It wasn't the, back the blue that we have now, but they respected law enforcement by and large. But it was Methvin and Clyde that gunned down the law enforcement. I mean, in the movie they show it as Bonnie, but Bonnie, as near as the author can tell, never fired any weapons in any crime. And indeed, at this point, would not have been capable of firing the Browning automatic rifle that was Clyde's gun of choice because she couldn't even stand on 2 legs at this point. And you do need to be able to stand on 2 legs. I mean, theoretically, she could have done it from the car, but the angle would have been wrong because she would have had to lean out the window, and it's her. Well, she could have done it, I guess, but that's not what was reported. What was reported was that she was standing over the guy shooting at him. And this was from the farmer that they showed in the Highwaymen. Oh my God, I'm rambling. Where am I? She didn't shoot the guy. That was Henry Methvin and Clyde Barrow. Bars, for the record, Browning automatic rifles, they were not that easy to get back then. I mean, they were, you could certainly buy them, but primarily they were seen as military weapons, not hunting rifles, and most people needed hunting rifles, especially in the Depression, because they could go out and shoot their own food, right? The only reason that Clyde had so many of them, and they were his weapon of choice, Browning automatic rifle, right? The only reason Clyde had so many of the damn things is he had a particular penchant for robbing state militia armories. Like, National Guard bases today are all behind brick walls and high fences and require key cards and access codes, and there's armed guards at the gates. Back then, they were a favored target of Clyde Barrow, who appreciated the superior firepower available at the average state armory, and they were really easy to rob in the 1930s. Ah, the good old days. So on that particular fateful April 1st of 1934, Methvin misunderstood Clyde. In the past, when opportunity presented itself, Clyde and Bonnie had been known to take law enforcement officers captive for a day and drive around with them, kind of talking and laughing. Bonnie would charm them before letting them go somewhere with a story to tell, sometimes with money in their pockets so they could catch a bus home, depending on how far the joyride took them. So when Clyde said, "let's take them," he meant let's kidnap them and take them for a joyride. Methvin understood let's take them to mean let's kill them and get out of here. And it was at this point that the public began to turn against Bonnie and Clyde, because one of the downed officers was engaged and set to marry like a week later. His fiancée actually wore her wedding dress to his funeral. And it was at this point that Clyde's mother stopped keeping track of when they would meet in person, because it just so devastated her that her son would take an engaged woman's man from her and leave her grieving, not even a widow, right? All the movies show Bonnie and Clyde as these daring-do bank robbers, like folk heroes, Robin Hood, Maid Marian, right? They were not. They were petty thieves. They did rob a few banks, and those they did rob, they didn't get much from. I think the highest haul they got at one point was like maybe 20,000, but that had to be split like 3 ways, and it never lasted long because they liked to buy fancy clothes, and they liked to stay in motor courts and, eat expensive meals and buy shit they didn't need, much like everybody today. It wasn't until after they died that bank robbery became a federal crime. Primarily, they robbed mom and pop shops. And they weren't stealing cars from dealerships, they were stealing them from whoever had left their cars conveniently available to be stolen. So, you go out from your house one morning to go to work and your car is gone. You're the victim of Bonnie and Clyde. Congratulations. Right? Fucking annoying, right? If you've ever had your vehicle stolen, you know how annoying that is. It was after the Eastham jailbreak that Frank Hamer was brought into it. Now, the Highwaymen got that right. The rest of it, meh. Hollywood always screws up the truth. Always. Because they're trying to sex it up. Literally no need to. The story of Bonnie and Clyde was exciting enough all on its own. In 1934, the governor was Ma Ferguson. That was true. And of course, Kathy Bates is always fantastic. Ma Ferguson absolutely despised Frank Hamer. They did not see eye to eye politically, and the feeling was very much mutual. Warden Lee Simmons from Eastham Prison knew Hamer would bulldog the Barrow gang into the ground, and he got Ferguson's permission to bring Hamer back into the Rangers for this one special assignment. And Hamer literally dogged their tracks. Basically starting from West Dallas, he moved his way out in concentric circles, following them from West Dallas up to Indiana, Ohio, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Missouri. The only place Hamer kept a deliberate low profile was Louisiana. And that's because of Henry Methvin. Right? The Methvins were from Louisiana, and he wanted them to feel they had a safe place to go that he didn't know about, right? He knew about everything else. They knew it, so they eventually became aware that Hamer was following them, and of course they knew why. I mean, they weren't dumb. They were well aware the laws were after them, but Hamer was a legend at this point in time, an absolute legend of a lawman. What they didn't know is that Ivy Methvin, who is Henry's father, was working with Bienville Parish Sheriff's Office and Hamer and Dallas deputies to catch the Barrow Gang in exchange for a full pardon for Henry. Hamer had been given pardoning authority by Ma Ferguson, and so he used that to his advantage and said, yes, we can pardon Henry for crimes done in Texas. And on May 23rd, 1934, the trap sprung. I think it was 116 rounds poured into the stolen, of course, 1934 Ford Model 40B deluxe four-door sedan with a flathead V8 engine. Much as Clyde enjoyed robbing state arsenals for the bars, his preferred vehicle was always a Ford V8. So much so that he allegedly wrote a letter to Henry Ford that reads, "Dear Sir, while I still have got breath in my lungs, I will tell you what a dandy car you make. I have drove Fords exclusively when I could get away with one. For sustained speed and freedom from trouble, the Ford has got every other car skinned, and even if my business hasn't been strictly legal, it don't hurt anything to tell you what a fine car you got in the V8. Yours truly, Clyde Champion Barrow." Now, some people say, well, his middle name was Chestnut. That's bullshit. It can't be from Clyde. Here's the thing. When Clyde was arrested prior to his first official prison sentence, he did say his name was Clyde Champion Barrow, kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke of, haha, you caught me. What a champ I am. Sarcasm. Not everybody gets it. So it is entirely possible this letter is legitimate. Henry Barrow may have been illiterate, but Clyde Barrow was not. He had at least an 8th grade education, which was common for that time. 8th grade was where a lot of people stopped going to school. Ford certainly believed it was legitimate, and that letter is actually on display at the Henry Ford Museum. during the infamous shootout, one of the deputies, I think it was one of the Dallas deputies, but it may have been one of the Bienville Parish deputies, jumped the gun and fired the first shot. And that, of course, when everybody's already in high tension, the adrenaline's running, once that first shot was fired, everybody followed suit. Clyde was killed instantly with a round to his head. Like, just one of the shots went boom right through here, and he was down. I guess he's sitting on the left beat this way, right? All 6 members of the team, there were 6 lawmen, all of them that had coalesced to kill or capture the duo, recall hearing Bonnie scream. They all report that it was the most haunting sound they've ever heard, and it literally stayed with them the rest of their lives. They heard her scream before the rest of the rounds were fired. So they had that one shot, went through his head, Bonnie screams, and they opened fusillade. Word spread like wildfire, and the locals of Bienville Parish came out to try and cut souvenirs from the bodies because we are all a bunch of ghouls when it comes to it, right? And we all know good goddamn well that 100 years on, if this happened today, nothing has changed, except that now the free-range target practice would probably be live streamed on Facebook, complete with idiot commentary and all cops are bastards protestations, despite the fact that, again, these were people who had, in fact, committed murder, robbed banks, robbed people, stolen cars. They were not nice people. They were not good guys. They were not Robin Hood and Maid Marian. They were criminals. And they had murdered people, not just law enforcement, but other people had been murdered. But, well, Facebook is stupid, and here we are. All throughout their criminal run, Bonnie and Clyde stayed in contact with their families. The highwayman references red beams overheard on phone calls. We don't know this code from Frank Hamer because he didn't know it was a code. The highwaymen didn't know this was a code, all right? The family early on assumed their calls were being tapped. They weren't, but they assumed it, and so they began using a code almost from the time that Bonnie and Clyde went on the run. They mentioned red beans whenever Clyde wanted to meet. So, hey, I'm having red beans. Do you want to come over for dinner? And they would know there was a meeting on. We know this because of interviews from surviving family members. It wasn't anything that Hamer figured out. Not to disparage the man. He, like I said, absolute legend of a lawman, but he didn't know that. After their funerals, the federal government enacted laws for aiding and abetting. They also made bank robbery a federal crime at that point, and that's how they were able to bring down John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, and a lot of the other gangsters from the 1930s. But the federal government enacted laws about aiding and abetting. Now, poor families from West Dallas didn't have money to hire lawyers to argue that what they had done, staying in contact, feeding Bonnie and Clyde, was not, in fact, illegal when they had done it. It wasn't. It was fully legal. But, they didn't have lawyers to argue that fact for them, and so various family members were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 1 month to 1 year after the deaths of Bonnie and Clyde. Part of Hamer's bounty, if you will, was he was able to claim whatever he wanted as a souvenir from the capture of them, so he took all the guns. The sheriff in Bienville Parish tried to argue that the car was part of the bounty. The original owner of the car from whom it was stolen said, no, that's my car, I want it back. Actually filed suit and won and got her car back, and it went on the road as part of a don't do crime thing. Like, it was initially leased from her and eventually sold to the guy doing it. It was some doctor of something, criminology maybe, who did this, like, don't do crime. Crime is bad, like, sideshow thing in the 1930s and the 1940s. And currently the car eventually was sold to a casino in Nevada. So it's in West Prim, Nevada? Hold up. I actually haven't seen it, but I live in Nevada. Buffalo Bills Resort and Casino in Prim, Nevada. So if you ever find yourself in Prim, Nevada, you can go see the Bonnie and Clyde death card. Complete with bloodstains. They also have, they're like a fairly good memorabilia collector of the Bonnie and Clyde stuff. They have, like, clothes and stuff like that. This book was excellent. It tracks in detail the movements of America's most infamous duo, when they robbed where, who was involved in each heist, what happened to the surviving key players. Other than the ones who died in a hail of bullets. The Highwayman was made for Netflix in 2019. This book was released in 2009, so it doesn't address what that movie got wrong, although the closing scene where the people are mobbing the death car and cutting off souvenirs is disgustingly accurate. There were people who somebody actually tried to cut off Clyde's trigger finger. The deputy managed to stop them, but yikes. People are ghoulish. He does address the Warren Beatty movie, of course, and how the other than the names of the key players, it was a glorified Hollywood suggestion of what happened. And the movie suggests that Clyde may have been impotent and possibly gay. He was not on either count. The movie combines key characters like W.D. Jones and Henry Methvin, superimposes Raymond Hamilton's persona. I'm sorry, not Raymond Hamilton, Mary O'Dare's persona. I have to fix a typo here. Mary O'Dare's persona onto Blanche Barrow, a change that was definitely not for the better, because Blanche Barrow, by all accounts, remained fairly cool, calm, and collected during all of this. I mean, she wasn't thrilled to be part of the shootouts. She certainly wasn't happy to lose her eyesight. She was devastated by the death of her husband, but she was not the screeching harpy that she is portrayed in the movie. Frank Hamer's widow is the only one who was able to successfully sue. Bonnie and Clyde were public figures at this point in time. They were seen as public figures, so Warren Beatty could do whatever he wanted. When he was making the movie, he actually approached Blanche Barrow and said, "Hey, I would like to use your name in the film. Your name is not considered public figure. Can I use your name and make a character after you?" And she read the script and said yes, but then after the movie was released, she's like, yeah, that movie was not like the script I read, but at that point it was too late. She had already accepted payment for the use of her name. The only one who was able to successfully sue was Frank Hamer's widow. She sued and won an undisclosed amount for the depiction of Hamer as somewhat bumbling and having been captured by the dangerous duo. Now, again, they did like to capture lawmen and take them for a joyride, but they never caught Frank Hamer like that, and that's what she sued and won on. But the movie did get their undying devotion to each other correct. A devotion that is still seen as romantic 90 years after they met their end in a hail of bullets. I don't know. Dying together does not sound as romantic when it's done under fire. I don't know. Dig out a cherry here. So that's it for this week. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys next Sunday. Bye.